Hey guys, so for today's ad lib, there are two things that I kind of want to talk about, and I'm not sure in advance which one is going to be the dominant thing. So, one thing I want to talk about is navigating cultural crosswinds or navigating cultural conflict, and the other one is how to talk about things that you're not an expert on, or kind of how to think and write and talk about things that just you know that you are ignorant about, or maybe you don't even know how ignorant you are. So it's how to articulate yourself from a position of uncertainty. And both of these things are directly related, because when you are in the middle of a cultural clash or cultural conflict, or however you want to frame it, basically what's happening is you are being confronted with a context, right? So each culture is a context. You're being confronted with the context that you don't have full knowledge of. I mean, you don't even have full knowledge of your own context, right? You have your contextual knowledge of your own context. And you don't know everything about your own context except from inside the context, and there'll be things about the context that you can only appreciate from outside the context, right? There are things about your relationship with someone that you don't really understand until you leave it or you're away from it and you can look back on it, right? And so there's that. There's your cultural understanding of, there's your contextual understanding of your culture, of your context. And then there's this new culture or this new context, this foreign context, this different context that you're not familiar with, that you may have some idea of, but your idea is itself, limited to a degree that you may not realize. It's imprecise to a degree you may not realize. It's inaccurate to a degree you may not realize. And you're going to have to, in the clash, you are going to encounter more uncertainty, more confusion, ideas that you thought were, things that you understood well, will reveal themselves to potentially be more complex than you had originally imagined. Some new person that you meet may have an entirely different set of meanings to each word that you use, right? So you might think of, you might come from a context where boldness in action is celebrated and respected, and they might come from a context where boldness is seen as intrusive and aggressive and negative things. Wow, I look sleepy. I guess I didn't get much sleep last night. Anyway, and you repeat this for everything, and just, it's if you Google for images of like cultural icebergs or like deep cultural ideas. So usually like the superficial stuff is clothing, food, how you dress. I mean, how you dress, language, like words that you use slightly differently. But as you go deeper and deeper into the subconscious, or into the kind of unspoken rules, there are things like taboos, and just deep beliefs and assumptions about how the world is, what's important, what is valuable, what should be sacrificed, what should not be sacrificed, all of those things. And we live in a time of great cultural clash. Like, okay, clash sounds negative, and there will be negative elements to what happens, but there will also be positive elements, right? So it's just this great messy intermingling, which can be good, can be bad. It's like creative, destructive. And one of my concerns is, it feels like if we navigate it well, the future will be exciting and bright. If we navigate it poorly, it will be an ugly zero-sum future that will not be fun to live in, and will, you'll be watching your back all the time, and you'll be suspicious of each other, and that's just not pleasant. And I do feel like I have a perspective that is relatively uncommon or unique, that I think, I feel like, this is what I've trained for my whole life, in a way. Like, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Singaporean. I am a Singaporean Indian, Singaporean Tamil. What does that mean? So if you look up like Singapore's racial statistics, it's like 75% ish Chinese. It's about 10 to 15% Malay. It's like 7% Indian. And within Indian, you have, so are people who migrated, like their ancestors migrated here from India, usually typically. And within in India itself is a massive, it's 4 times the size of the States. It had 4 or 5 times the size of the States. It has many, many different languages, many, many different religions, many, many different ethnicities. If India is effectively more complex than Europe, I would think, like in terms of like the number of variables, number of languages, number of so on and so forth. And so even in Singapore, the Singaporean Indian community is itself complex, because there are the people who came very early on, there are the people who came recently, there are the people who literally, there are people who are just arriving right now, and there's like there's like the old arrivals and the new arrivals. There's conflict there. There's people who are wealthier and less wealthy. There's conflict there, and that's within a subset of a small city-state in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia itself, if you look into the history, it's a maritime region. Like, so there's continental Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, down to Malaysia, I guess. And then there's like there's what's other than continental, there's maritime Southeast Asia, which is the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Brunei. And and this is along one of the biggest shipping routes in the world, like global trade shipping. There's the Straits of Singapore and Malacca, right, which is between China and India. So like if you want to take a ship from China, if you want to trade between China and India by sea, you have to go through maritime Southeast Asia. So you go past Indonesia, you go through you go along Straits of Malacca, Malaysia, Singapore. And the point of me saying all that is, being in Southeast Asia means that you have this heritage, and I want to talk about this in my Singapore videos as well. But like there is a cultural heritage of mixing and intermingling, and just things are changing all the time, like for hundreds of years. So Singapore itself, people when people ask you about Singapore, when you look up Singapore history, people tend to start with the day that the white guy arrived. Sir Stamford Raffles from the British East India Company arrived and landed in 1819, and that's when Singapore became a trading post of the East India Company, and then it became a crown colony of the British. And then it was under the British occupation / settlement until 1943, when the Japanese invaded, and then they occupied, and then that was that. So Singapore was a Japanese vassal state, colony, whatever you want to call it. And then there was the British flag, and then there was the Japanese flag, and then after the Japanese left, the British came back, and then after that there was we merged with Malaya to become Malaysia, and so there was a Malaysian flag, and then we had like a divorce, right, separation. And I think Singapore is the only country in the world that received its independence against its own will. It was kicked out, right? And so then we finally got the Singapore flag in 1965. So the city-state, the nation, the kind of corporate, the government of Singapore, sort of like that institutional Singapore, is only 50-something years old. But Singapore, the island, is it's as an island, it's been around forever, right? As with all land masses, I don't know the nuance there, but Singapore used to be a part of the Srivijaya Empire, which was it was part of the Srivijaya Empire, and it was part of the Majapahit Empire, and both of those empires were different empires with different. So I don't know the specifics. I gotta look it up, but like they were different religions, different whatever. And so sure, there's nobody from Srivijaya or Majapahit who is kind of enduring into Singapore today. But the point is that Singapore has that kind of very old and very turbulent changing of the tides kind of history. And so who's to say that Singapore as it is now is going to be the way it is 50 years from now or 100 years from now? And that's something that I think is kind of a part of our national identity a little bit. It's negotiable to a degree that I'm not sure that you can say the same is true for the States, for example. I don't know. I'm not American, but I'm familiar with it, kind of, right? And I feel like there's just a different relationship with culture, a different relationship with identity, a different relationship with engaging with different identities. So Singapore is really small, so and it's made up of many different cultures. And while there is kind of a dominant Chinese Singaporean majority, we do have to contend with many different kinds of people, and again, this is different people will disagree to different degrees about how much the mingling really is. Like there is racism and all those things, but like I've been thinking a lot about how the national narrative in Singapore is something that is very negotiable to a degree that very few Singaporeans outside of the government maybe seem to fully appreciate. Like it's really, I believe it's possible for a handful of individuals to change the trajectory of Singapore, not by inventing something out of thin air. I think I don't think that you can do that anywhere. Like you can't just invent a culture and because you think it's like Esperanto, right? You can't create a language and expect people to use it. Like there will be some people, but for it to really stick, you have to have a narrative that's kind of has callbacks to the root origins that appeals to what the people want. Anyway, that's a story for another video. But the point I want to make, I guess, is that I'm very cognizant of this stuff, and so if you look at India, right, and there's North India, there's South India, there's many different states, and Tamil Nadu, the country of Tamils, is all the way at the South India, and it's also, so like there are Tamils in Sri Lanka as well, which is another country that is south of India, if you're not sure. And so that what I didn't really appreciate until maybe a few years ago, I mean I vaguely kind of knew, is that so most of India, well, again, this is one of those things where I'm not super qualified to talk about it, but here's my sense of what it's like. I think most of India is Hindi speaking ish. Like there are lots of regions where they don't speak Hindi. I think there's like a Hindi belt in the middle where everyone speaks Hindi, and everyone has their own kind of local regional languages. But if you go all the way to the south is like the south, like Tamil Nadu. They are very proud of their Tamil language and speaking Tamil and having Tamil culture. I've joked sometimes that like the south of India is kind of like the north of Westeros in Game of Thrones. Like just the people are different there. They do things differently. They have a different culture. I mean, it's still part of so like I believe the current chief of the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, Space Agency in India. The chief, I believe he's a Tamil guy, and so again, I try to learn more and more about Indian culture and India, the state, the motherland, the landmass, right? But I'm not Indian, Like, so anywhere else I go in the world, if I go to Thailand, if I go to the Philippines, if I go to the States, when people see me, they're like, oh, that's an Indian guy. They're not wrong, but, I'm not an Indian citizen of, like, I'm an Indian diaspora, right? But when I go to India, people from India quickly recognize that I'm not from there. They're like, oh, are you from Malaysia? Because that's kind of like where there's a large population of Tamils outside of India, right? So I've kind of had to navigate this my whole life, which is even in Singapore, amongst the minority Singaporean Tamil community, I don't speak Tamil very well. I'm kind of very bookish English, and I used to feel kind of guilty about that when I was a child. Like my Tamil is not very good. And I wasn't very immersed in Tamil pop culture, like the movies and the songs. Like I wasn't very into it. So when I had to go for like Tamil classes with my fellow Tamil students, I always felt a little bit ashamed to be there, and kind of like I didn't fit in, and like I wondered if they judged me. I wondered if they assumed that I judged them. And I have friends. I have Tamil friends. I have some Tamil friends who are like almost scholarly in their Tamil speaking skills, and they are like in the arts, and they're really immersed in kind of Singaporean Tamil culture. And I'm glad that now that I'm older, I kind of have relationships with those people, and we can kind of bond and get along and learn from each other. But so I didn't fit in within the local Tamil community. I was, most of my friends in real life around me are Chinese. Like it's Singaporean Chinese, and that's just the way my life has been. There's not a lot of representation of Singaporean Indians in the media. Less like I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I can get into about that I don't really want to get into the details of in this video. But the point is, I'm kind of used to being stereotyped. I'm used to people assuming things about me. I'm used to having to win over people who are kind of suspicious of me because I'm not what they're used to. And it was challenging, and I didn't even realize that it was challenging when I was younger, because again, your life is what you know, right? Like, my life is my life, so I don't know whether it could be easier or harder until I kind of corroborate with other people and talk to other people. And so, part of being a minority and trying to navigate cultural complexity is you have to talk to a lot of people. And when you talk to a lot of people, you have to start finding ways to relate to people. I have a thread about Obama, who's one other person I feel who relates to this. Like, he was half black, half white, so he's obviously not white, but he's also, amongst other black American, he's like half Kenyan, right? So he's not African American. He hasn't been through, like, he doesn't have the same cultural touch points as like black Americans who are descended from slaves, for example. And so, if you read his memoirs, Dreams from My Father, he talks about like his challenges navigating that. And when he goes back to visit Kenya, when you say go back, even that's kind of like slightly complex, right? Like, he wasn't born in Kenya, so he grew up in Indonesia, which was interesting, right? So Indonesia is, again, like I mentioned earlier about Southeast Asia, there are a lot of different kinds of people, lots of different races, religions, but still he would have been obviously not from Indonesia. He would obviously have been from somewhere else. And he grew up there, and he spoke the language, he learned the culture. And then when he went to Kenya for like a discovery trip, right? He just went to visit, maybe for the book. I can't remember. And he goes there, and like the other people that he meets, like from his extended family, he doesn't exactly relate to them. He's like the alien of the family in Kenya, and right. So here's this guy who's an alien / outsider / misfit who doesn't fit in everywhere. And he becomes president of the United States of America, and that's not an accident. That's something that he very deliberately worked towards. And he was like a community organizer. My frame is that and so another character like this is Bozoma St. John. She used to be like a chief brand officer, or like just a chief something brand marketing executive at, I think, Apple Music and at Uber. I think she's getting like her own show now, and she's similar. She was from, her parents were, I think, from Ghana, and she was raised in like Connecticut or somewhere very white in the States. And she's not African, she's not white, she's not African American. She's just a foreigner everywhere. And the thing about people like this, Trevor Noah is another example, right? He's like biracial. He was born a crime, and he's like, when you're that different from everybody, you don't have a table to sit at. You don't have an in-group that you can preemptively expect will take care of you. Like, if you go to prison, right, there's all these gangs based on ethnicities and whatnot. Like, there's no gang that will obviously take you in. So you have to develop like your charisma and your charm and your ability to make friends with people independent of who you are, which is, again, it's difficult to do. It's unfair to expect of a child. But once you do it and you get good at it, you develop a skill set that you can then use everywhere, and it's like a superpower. It makes you a great traveler, for example. So I have a thread somewhere about how, like, I believe that I understand what it means to be culturally sensitive, even if I don't understand the culture. Like, I feel like, okay, so I'm familiar with Southeast Asia. I'm familiar with South India somewhat, India, China. I'm familiar with Chinese people, but I feel like you could toss me into some totally strange place that I'm not familiar. So strange to me, some place that I'm not familiar with. Throw me in like, I know very little about Latin America, for example, right? But I feel like I could wake up tomorrow in Latin America, and barely. I would have to teach myself the language from scratch, I guess, and struggle with it. But like, I feel like I can figure out, what do people think is important, what's sacred to them, what are their values, what do they seem to care about. Like, I have had to ask these questions about everybody I interact with all my life. And so I just keep doing that, and I'm confident that, I feel comfortable talking to new people. So even, I remember when I first got a few black followers from the US, like African Americans, I was pretty excited. which because you don't see black people in Singapore much. Like very very recently, I've noticed a handful in Singapore, but you don't really get black people in Singapore, and you see them in American media, but you don't see them like day to days, and you don't really, if you're in Singapore, it's halfway across the planet, you don't really know their struggle, you don't really know their stories. Like, you know as much as you read about, right? And when you read about things from the news or from Wikipedia, there's a limit to what you can learn, because there are things that people don't say, right? And there are things that people say to each other in private that they don't say in public, that if you're trying to develop a cultural understanding of the world in public, you can get like this kind of academic understanding, but like the real shit, you have to talk to somebody over a beer, right? And see what they tell you afterwards, which I got the chance to do when I visited the States, and that was very interesting and wholesome for me. And I believe that we're gonna have to do more of this in the coming years. I've described a few times that there is like this one way I frame all of this is there's like the source land, which is like where, like, China is a source land, India is a source land where people are from, versus diaspora. So diaspora, Asian Americans, Singaporean Indians, like just people whose ancestors were from some source land and then they're somewhere else. I feel like there's going to be a source land versus, there already is a lot of source land versus diaspora tension. And there's a whole, I could make a separate video about that, because there are all these things that diaspora do differently than sourceland people, that just there's different values, there's different relationships to things that people take as sacred, for example. So like in some ways diaspora folk can be simultaneously more liberal and simultaneously more conservative than the sourceland. Like some people say that the diaspora culture gets stuck in stasis in the year that the first immigrants moved, because they're holding on to their culture, because they're going somewhere new and unfamiliar, and they want to preserve their culture. But culture isn't something that gets preserved, right? It's something that evolves all the time. So like when a Tamil person in Tamil Nadu in India is hanging out with his friends and speaking Tamil and watching movies, he isn't thinking, I need to preserve my culture, because his culture is anything he does, right? Whereas if you're a minority, if you're a Singaporean Tamil, you will hear all the time, oh, you gotta speak proper Tamil, that's like, following, like, you can't use English words in your Tamil, that's like corrupting the language. People in Tamil Nadu don't care. They just, when they speak with their friends or whatever, they just use English all the time. Like, it's just whatever works for them, right? So there's some conflict there. There's many different kinds of conflict. I think I will make a separate video about that. But I'm talking about this because I observe all the time that people are not very good at navigating cultural conflict. And even like the age-old kind of men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of simplistic, whatever. There's a multiplicity of male cultures, there's a multiplicity of female cultures, there's overlapping cultures with expectations for what male and female roles are, what like just there's all, like, even let's say being a woman in a all male environment, you have to navigate male culture, right? And it happens less often the other way around, where a man has to kind of learn female culture. I personally recommend it. I recommend reading women's books. I recommend watching movies and TV shows written by women, directed by women. And not because of some social justice kind of thing, but really it just expands your mind, because people of different cultures have different perspectives and different priorities, different values, and they will challenge you and your values and perspectives. And if you really care about where you're from or who you are, what your identity is, you will seek, I believe that you should seek out alternate perspectives so that you can better understand your own. And I guess there's always a risk that you might end up deciding that your culture may not be as great as you had thought it was, and you realize that, oh, all cultures have their own values, but some cultures seem to be more developed in some ways, or more better at certain things. Some cultures seem to focus on other things. Some cultures seem to be constrained by their environments, like if there is a community that's decimated by poverty and those things, like, then they will they will respond in certain ways that you might then want to ascribe to, oh, it's their culture, they are like that. But actually it's just, poverty does things to you that changes the way you behave. And so there's this endless complexity. There are no final answers to anything. All you can really do is be honest about your inquiry, be honest about what you think you know, but that you don't know. You know what I mean? So it's like I have found, so I want to finish this before 30 minutes. I have found that people are very well. So like I do once in a while, like 1 in 100 or so people, 1 in a couple of hundreds people. I get people who get angry because I'm asking questions. But generally, and they are kind of like, they're very sensitive, or they've been primed or conditioned by their environment, or they've been traumatized, or they've had a lot of bad experiences. They have come to get very defensive about questions, and it is also a thing that some people do where they ask questions in bad faith, meaning you say you're just I'm just wondering, and then you ask a question that's dehumanizing or disrespectful, and so but and that's harder on a text-based medium like Twitter. But I find that in personal human interactions, people can tell when you're trying to be respectful, and people can tell when you're trying to learn. And the challenge really is to embody the spirit of learning and curiosity, to say that, hey, this is where I come from, this is how I was raised, this is what I believe, and what do you believe? What have you seen? What do you know? What do you think? And can we learn together? Can we learn each other's point of view? Like, hey, that thing that you like, that you guys do, is similar to this thing that we guys do. And you can start with like food, and every culture has its like indulgent wheat dish. Like there's naans and tacos and pratas and just all those things. And there's many different entry points to understanding other people's cultures. And I guess I'm talking about this because it's going to happen a lot more. Like, it's really going to be like this decade and maybe the next decade afterwards. Like, we're just going to see there are billions of people who are going to come online, who haven't come online yet. And we are going to hear from them, and there's going to be a lot of argument and disagreement, and people value different things and have different assessments of the values of things. And so people are going to argue about the values of things, like, it's like what movies are good, right? Like what are you'll reveal that, I mean, I don't even want to talk about specifics right now. I just wanna make it clear, I guess, that this is something I'm going to be talking about a lot more. I guess I will go into specifics about movies, books, maybe. Twitter. I guess I'll do some like meta social commentary. But the point is, I want to have fun, and I want other people to have fun. I think I once wrote about like a playground analogy. Like, if you want to play with other kids at the playground, like, you're gonna have some bumps and scrapes, right? And that's just part of playing. But you also want to notice that if there's a kid that's like bullying other kids, like, don't beat a kid down and kick him in the face and call it play. Like there are, I like this idea of intersubjective, which is that something it's not entirely objective, it's not fixed, but it's not entirely subjective either, in the sense that nobody can agree on anything because everybody has a completely unique subjective experience. But rather, there's an intersubjective experience where people can have a consensus. And so, for example, like, which side of the road do you drive on, right? That's one of my favorite examples. Like, should you drive on the left or the right? There's no clear answer, but there's no like universal answer of which is the right thing to do. But the right thing to do is, in this case, what everyone else is doing. Like, you don't rebel against society by driving on the wrong side of the road. It doesn't help you do anything. It just makes you dangerous to people. And similarly, I feel like with cultural things, there are intersubjective things where things make sense within a certain context, and even within a multiplicity of contexts, right? So it's complex. It's complex, but it's not it's not like unbearably complex. We can always make things more complicated. But my point, but I don't wanna make something that's like intimidating and scary and inaccessible. I think what we need, or what I would like to see the world develop, is kind of a better basic playbook for interacting with people who are not familiar to you, in a good faith way. That, so I don't like the meme of like, if you don't know something, you have to educate yourself, go and do the reading yourself. Like, so there is, that comes from a place of reacting against abuse. Again, so some people come and ask questions in an abusive way, and some people are just tired from receiving kind of 101 questions all the time. So sure, but like, so there should be basic guides and stuff like that people can reference. But generally, so it's funny that as I'm thinking about this, I'm reflecting on how, like, all my life I have been asking people to just fucking get along, right? Like, whether it's in like a domestic environment, or whether it's in amongst my friends, or like I used to participate in like Singapore's local music scene. I used to participate in the political scene, and it just seems like a thing to me that people, and I guess maybe this is because I am a misfit outsider who's had to hard earn every single relationship that I have. I don't have a in-group. That people don't seem to appreciate how precious peace is, and how precious consensus is, and how precious it is to have agreements with people that you disagree with. And some people will say, "Oh, are you trying to make friends with Nazis?" No, but again, it's the I don't have answers. I have questions. I have lines of inquiry. I have a map of inquiry. I'm just not comfortable with people being way too certain about how the world is, how other people are going to behave, and what other people's behavior means. Like, there's this sense of, I mean, so you can spot patterns in the way people behave, but if you're way too certain about what other people's behavior means, then it's like you don't allow the world to surprise you. And if you don't allow the world to surprise you, then it won't, right? And then you live this very stale life. So I guess I'll close with, let's invite the world to surprise us. Let's allow ourselves and each other to surprise us. Even in a marriage, like, people complain that marriages get stale and boring, but a big part of that is not because people are boring, but because people don't allow each other to surprise each other. Because people change. You come up with new ideas, and you suddenly one day you wake up and you're like, I want to learn to dance, alright? Just that kind of thing. And then you feel like, oh, but my husband thinks I'm a kind of guy person who stays at home. So if I say I want to go out dancing, that's kind of awkward, and that's kind of, he'll laugh at me, and so I'm not going to say it. Like, we have to let each other explore and play and be different, and we have to invite, we don't have to, okay, right? I invite other people to consider inviting the world to surprise them, right? Okay, I'll just end this here. Thanks for listening. Done.